VegFest Oahu, the family-friendly event at the Frank Fossey Civics Grounds, celebrates sustainable living. Folks sampled vegan food from vendors and checked out plant-based cooking demonstrations by local chefs. Families also had a chance to listen to speeches about health and environmental topics.
Diet conspiracy bearing the truth for profits. Standard American diet, which I think is very appropriately acronym as SAD, because it is a diet that is characterized by being high in meat, dairy, eggs, sodium, and processed sugars, which by its very nature means it's low in fruits, vegetables, fiber, and whole grains. Standard American diet is also associated with an increased risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, many different types of cancer, stroke, obesity, high blood pressure. Literally, the list goes on and on and on. We've known for a very long time that the standard American diet is a really troubling diet. We're actually one of the sickest nations in the world for being one of the wealthiest nations in the world. But there is hope, because there's a plant-based diet. A whole foods plant-based diet has been clinically proven to reverse heart disease, reverse type 2 diabetes, lower cholesterol, lower blood pressure, and lower your risks of many different types of cancer. So that information's been around for quite a while. How many people are aware that plant-based diet can reverse heart disease? Right on. So a lot of people, and this is probably a very well-educated audience, but that information isn't hidden. It's available for anyone who's interested in it. So what I'm going to focus on in this presentation is, if that information is available, why aren't we hearing about it from the large health organizations? So to start with, heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer of human beings on this planet, which is phenomenal. The thought that heart disease kills more people than war, than car accidents, than, hunger, anything. Heart disease is the #1 killer on this planet, and that's 17 million people die every single year from heart disease alone. To try and figure out how 17 million people, just to wrap your head around that, because that's just such an abstract number. It's so massive. If you picture people just jumping on jumbo jets every single day, and 4 of them crashing every single hour, nobody would ever get on a plane again. The entire aviation industry would shut down. People would say there's no way. And that would be headline news every single day if that many people were dying from plane crashes. And yet that's what's happening every single day from heart disease. And we're not talking about solutions. We're often talking about really pseudo-solutions, if we even talk about the situation at all. So heart disease, leading drivers of heart disease, tobacco smoke, alcohol, and meat. You can pretty much stop anybody on the street and ask them if red meat is good for their heart. And chances are they're going to say, no. Everybody knows that, right? Is there anybody here who hasn't heard that red meat is bad for your heart? Right. When you consume animal products, particularly meat, it actually coats your blood cells, makes your blood really thick. It changes your hormone levels, creates plaque on your arteries, stiffens your arteries, makes your arteries less likely to react to change in blood pressure, and overall leads to heart disease or a cardiovascular disease. But there is a solution. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Dean Ornish and many others have published papers showing that a plant-based diet devoid of added oils and saturated fat can actually reverse heart disease. So the image on the left is before treatment, and the treatment is stop eating animals, just eat plants, remove oil from your diet. You can actually strip away plaque from your arteries. And this is something that nobody thought was possible. It was always thought until relatively recently that if you had heart disease, if you got that diagnosis, it's a death sentence. That's it. There is no solution, because no drug reverses heart disease, and that's amazing. But people should let that sink in. It's an astounding rate of people in this country who are on heart medications, whether for blood thinning or cholesterol lowering drugs, and yet no drug has ever reversed heart disease. No surgery will reverse heart disease. Plant-based diet. Actually, no other diet has ever been proven to reverse heart disease. It's the only diet in the world. It's the only thing that we know of at this point that actually can reverse a deadly disease. Eating a plant-based diet and removing saturated fat from your diet will actually pull plaque off the arteries. Again, something that was unheard of until relatively recently. And yet, if you go to the American Heart Association, the leader of heart education and advocacy, the place that most Americans look for recommendations on how to have a healthy heart, you're not going to find the benefits of a plant-based diet. In fact, you'll actually see that they have an entire section for beef recipes on their website. Why would a health organization, a heart organization nonetheless, have huge recommendations for eating red and processed meat on their website? But we'll come back to that. So there's cancer. Cancer is responsible for 1 out of every 4 deaths in the United States. It's hard to know anyone who doesn't have a personal connection to cancer in some way. My grandmother died of cancer. My sister died of cancer. My mom has dealt with cancer for many years now. It is so prevalent. It's almost impossible to ignore. And cancer has there's a lot of different elements to cancer. Just to dispel any myths among vegans, being vegan does not mean you will not get cancer. We live in an extremely toxic environment, sadly. We are bombarded with environmental pesticides, with environmental pollutants, and we also inherit genetic differences that may make us more predisposed to cancer. But no other lifestyle lowers your risk of developing cancer than a plant-based diet. But the World Health Organization looked at over 800 studies from 20 different countries and saw that the leading cause of colorectal cancer was actually eating animal products, particularly processed meat. That just one serving of processed meat a day increased your risk of developing colorectal cancer by 18%. So that's 2 strips of bacon, that's 3 slices of deli meat. Nothing else comes even close to increased risk of bowel cancer than processed meat. The World Health Organization classifies carcinogenic, cancer-causing substances in categories. And so they put processed meat in a class, group 1 carcinogen, which is in the same group as plutonium, asbestos, tobacco smoke, to name just a few. So we're talking it's serious. This is the World Health Organization. It's not some quack somewhere thinking that meat is bad. This is legitimate science. They actually categorized red meat as a group 2 carcinogen. But if you go to the American Cancer Society, you're not going to see a recommendation to stop eating processed meat. In fact, you're actually going to see recommendations to eat processed meat. Most of the people who go to the American Cancer Society's website are looking because they themselves have cancer or a loved one has cancer, and they're looking for recommendations. And yet this is after the World Health Organization's studies were published, they still have recommendations for processed meat on their website. A group 1 carcinogen. A vegan diet has been shown to be one of the best preventative things you can do to prevent cancer, but it's also one of the best things you can do to treat cancer. You can drop the blood of a vegan, someone who's eaten vegan, on a petri dish of cancer cells, and the cancer cells will go into apoptosis, programmed cell death. They'll actually kill themselves just from vegan blood, which says a lot. It says we really want blood that's healthy if we're going to try and fight cancer. So diabetes is a 7th leading cause of death in the United States. Diabetes has now started to be called diobesity, because diabetes and obesity are so hand in hand. If you are obese, there's more likely to be diabetic or type 2 diabetic. It's estimated in the next 25 years, 1 out of 3 Americans will be diabetic or pre-diabetic. That's an epidemic. That's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. How many people here have learned that sugar causes diabetes? All right, that's common. A lot of people say, you ask somebody what causes diabetes, and they'll say sugar. Sugar does not cause diabetes. And there's something that I learned while we made What the Health. I always thought sugar caused diabetes. That's what I've always been told. But actually, what causes diabetes is a buildup of fat in the bloodstream that blocks insulin receptors. And so the body isn't able to balance blood sugar. So having high blood sugar is a symptom of diabetes, but diabetes is the inability to release insulin properly. So I'll say that again because it blew my mind. Sugar doesn't cause diabetes, fat does. And the leading source of fat in most people's diet is from animal products. The leading cause of type 2 diabetes is processed meat. Actually, just one serving of processed meat a day increases your risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 51%. Nothing comes close to that. The thought that kids, for example, are eating processed meat every single day when they go to school or in their lunches or every single morning for breakfast, and a lot of Americans do that. They eat sausage or bacon or some sort of processed meat, and they're increasing their risk of diabetes. So there's no real surprise that Americans are suffering from type 2 diabetes at such an alarming rate. So, of course, American Diabetes Association, they'd have a big recommendation for eliminating processed meat, right? Nope. They encourage people to eat right on their front page red and processed meat, and on their recipes for healthy living, they have bacon-wrapped shrimp. I mean, it is unbelievable. It says healthy living at the top of it, and then a recommendation for bacon-wrapped shrimp. That's deep-fried food. What kind of health organization would suggest that? So it's no real great surprise that when you compare the recommended diet from the American Diabetes Association against a low-fat vegan diet, the vegan diet does phenomenally well. A low-fat vegan diet is actually twice, almost 3 times better at controlling and even reversing type 2 diabetes than the ADA recommended diet, which includes meat, dairy, eggs, processed meat. So why does the American Heart Association encourage people to eat red meat? American Cancer Society eat carcinogens. Susan G. Komen is supposed to be fighting breast cancer, dairy, and the American Diabetes Association doing processed meat. Well, sadly, it's a really simple Google search. While we made the film, we just started asking that question: what's the deal? Why are they talking? Or why aren't they talking about this? And it literally is this simple. You just Google the sponsors. American Diabetes Association receives hundreds of thousands of dollars from Dannon, dairy producer, Kraft Foods, which is the maker of Velveeta, Oscar Mayer processed meat, and Lunchables processed meat, and Bumblebee Foods, which is processed meat as well, leading cause of type 2 diabetes. American Cancer Society is receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from Tyson, which is one of the world's largest meat producers, and Yum Brand, owner of Pizza Hut, KFC, and Taco Bell. All carcinogenic. Susan G. Komen, who's supposed to be the pink ribbons, fighting breast cancer. They're receiving money from carcinogenic producers as well. Actually put their pink ribbons on it. The American Heart Association, to be honest, is the most disturbing. They're receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from the beef industry directly. From poultry manufacturers, from dairy producers, from fast food, from processed food manufacturers. I mean, it's just unabashed. This looks more like a NASCAR than it should look like a health organization. I mean, they're just stamped with every single horrible company you could think of. And these organizations, their mission is to stop cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and yet they're receiving money from the people who are perpetuating it. I mean, could you imagine if the American Lung Association was taking money from Philip Morris? Nobody would ever listen to that organization again. You say, that's a huge conflict of interest. We can't trust anything you say because you're taking money from the people who are killing us. And yet that's what's going on with these large health organizations. To be clear, I don't think these health organizations are bad. I think that at their core, they really do want to help people. They really do want to prevent. I think most of the people who work for these organizations want to prevent the diseases they're fighting against. But that's a major conflict of interest. It's a major, major conflict of interest. So What the Health, when it came out, got initially really good reviews. People were really excited about it. People were changing their lives, and they were feeling amped that they could take back their health. Then a bunch of negative press started coming out about the film, including actually Time Magazine did a piece about What the Health. And they all point to why What the Health is wrong, because What the Health ultimately promotes a plant-based diet and encourages people not to eat animals. They say, well, they get it wrong, not because veganism is unhealthy. No one actually has ever said that veganism is unhealthy. They just always say, well, eating meat isn't as bad as this film makes it out to be because cholesterol isn't a problem anymore, saturated fat isn't a problem anymore, you can go back to eating dairy all you want. Butter is actually good for you. That's what just keeps coming up. And how many people have heard that fat is good for you, right? It's becoming more and more prevalent. And they're pretty much the only study that they all source is a study that came out was this study. It's a cohort study, so they looked at a bunch of different studies and compiled them together and then looked at the conclusion. And the conclusion they came to was that saturated fat isn't necessarily associated with cardiovascular disease, higher blood cholesterol levels as well. There's another study that does that. And so media jumped all over this because they say, sweet, we can sell good news about bad habits, because that sells magazines, it gets people to click on their website, it gets people to pick up the newspaper. Selling good news about things that we all know are bad for us and that we don't want to think are bad for us, it's a great way to make money. What they don't cover, though, is the fact that this study was funded by the National Dairy Council. The leading producer of saturated fat is dairy in our diets. So why wasn't that talked about? Why isn't it that, hey, when every time someone attacks plant-based, or they say that cholesterol isn't a problem, that fat isn't a problem because of this study, why doesn't everyone say, you mean that propaganda piece from the dairy industry? Because people will very quickly say that What the Health is a propaganda film because I'm vegan and my co-director Kip Anderson's vegan. It's a propaganda film. The whole film's based on science, peer-reviewed science. You can see every single study that's used in the film on our website, whatthehealthfilm.com. You can go to the original source and you can see who funded it. So if, for example, a study came out that said broccoli is the best thing you could ever eat, it's a miracle food, it's the greatest, and it was funded by the broccoli industry, I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to look for somebody who is unbiased, who doesn't have a vested interest in the promotion of that product. Same thing right there. When you say saturated fat isn't bad for you and it's paid for saturated fat manufacturers, yeah, I'm going to have a hard time believing it. And then, in fact, this was actually, to be conspiratorial, but it's based on evidence. The global dairy industry actually got together in 2008 and they said, hey, dairy's taking a hard hit, saturated fat, nobody wants to eat it anymore. Let's fund studies that tell people that it's not so bad. So they actually said, and this is in their pamphlet, you can actually, I think this is on our website as well, this is their program for their whole conference. They wanted to fund studies that would neutralize the negative image of milk fat by regulators and medical professionals. So they literally just said, hey, we'll pay scientists to design studies that make our products not look so bad. Tobacco industry did the same thing. They designed studies that muddled the whole conversation. Oh, maybe cigarettes aren't as bad as people are making them out to be in order to sell more cigarettes. The Dairy Council isn't alone in this. The beef industry does this. Pork industry, poultry industry does this as well. Egg industry is notorious for doing this. They say they funded this study that said eggs don't negatively affect heart function. But if you look at the rest of the study, that's only when you compare it to eating a sausage McMuffin from McDonald's. So yeah, eggs aren't bad for you if you compare to them something that's really, really bad for you. But the interesting thing, so the conclusion of this study was eggs don't negatively affect heart function, but if you see the study and you read it, they actually compared somebody who didn't eat eggs, a group of patients that didn't eat eggs at all, versus a group of patients who ate eggs, versus a group of patients who ate sausage, cheese, McMuffin every morning. And the group that didn't eat any eggs had the best heart function. But that wasn't the conclusion because it was paid for by the American Egg Board. They don't just fund studies. This industry is involved clearly in heavy promotion of their products. They spend over $500 million every year promoting their products. And then they spend another $138 million lobbying the government. And why would they need to lobby the government? Every 5 years, the USDA creates dietary guidelines for Americans. And these are guidelines that tell Americans what they should eat. I think most people are aware of a food pyramid. The group that puts these guidelines together has historically been funded by McDonald's, National Dairy Council, American Meat Board, the Dairy Board, the Beef Board, the Egg Board, processed food manufacturers, fast food manufacturers, even alcohol, sugar companies. These are the people who are giving us recommendations on what to eat, and yet they're taking money from the companies that are killing us. Major conflict of interest. But if these people weren't taking money from these companies, they would be able to say the truth. And which is the most recent dietary guidelines, they actually wanted to encourage information about the negative environmental impacts of eating foods. And there was a huge outcry from the meat and dairy industry because they have a massive carbon footprint. And so they actually threatened to sue the USDA, say, you have no business talking about the environment when it comes to your dietary recommendations for Americans. We pay you too much to do that anyway, so keep your mouth shut. And then unfortunately, they didn't actually go through with their recommendations. Every year that the dietary guidelines come out, since its very inception in 1940, they've included meat and dairy. And actually, in one of these years, this year, they included alcohol as a recommendation for Americans. So the USDA is a part of the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that was designed to promote American farmers and to promote their products. But then they've also been charged with this mission to give dietary guidelines. And so if you have a product that is killing people, but as part of your mission to promote it, clearly you're going to have to promote it because that's the main mission of your group. The most recent dietary guidelines, they used a plate, got away from the pyramid, and thankfully they took away meat as part of the guidelines and they replaced it with protein. A lot of people still think protein only comes from meat, so there's still some confusion there. But they included dairy, and dairy. This is the government. This is our government. It's telling us to eat this way. 3/4 of Americans of color are lactose intolerant. Why would the government be telling people of color to eat foods that they can't digest or are killing them? And it's because they care more about dairy farmers than they do about our health. They care more about dairy farmers than they do about communities of color. Their whole mission is to make money. And it's not just Americans, it's actually most of the world's human population is actually lactose intolerant. It's about 80% of the world can't digest lactose past infancy. Big surprise, why would you need to digest lactose after being an infant? Once you're weaned off breast milk, you don't have any reason to drink lactose. There's a tiny, tiny percentage of Northern Europeans and Scandinavians that were able to digest lactose to survive harsh winters. Vast majority of the human population can't do it. And so it really shouldn't even be lactose intolerance, it should be lactose persistence. It's people have a genetic fluke that allows them to digest lactose versus that people who can't digest lactose have something wrong with them. And that's part of the narrative, for sure. The Surgeon General, who is responsible for putting warning labels on food and on products to warn Americans about things they should avoid or things they should encourage, they put warning labels on cigarettes. Why, if all this information is available, why don't they put it on meat? When we know that meat increases your risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, bowel cancer, and premature death. And the truth is that, sadly, the federal government has been bought out by this industry. They work hand in hand. So this industry is so powerful that they can actually create laws, too. So one of the most ridiculous things that we came across while making What the Health was these Cheeseburger Laws, as they've been called. And this is a law that exists in 14 states. I mean, it's ridiculous.
A Cheeseburger Law is a law that says a plaintiff cannot recover against a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer on the theory that the food made the plaintiff obese or caused an obesity-related disease.
So the guy that we had read that, he said, "Why'd you guys come up with such a stupid script?" And I said, "No, that's actually the law." So this was a direct response from the tobacco industry, getting lawsuits from consumers of tobacco products suffering from debilitating disease and having to pay billions of dollars in fines and lawsuits. So the fast food manufacturers and meat and dairy producers got together and they said, "Hey, we don't want the same thing to happen to us. Let's create legislation that prevents us. Before people start suing McDonald's over cheeseburgers, let's prevent that." And so they worked with the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which is a group of, it's a front for industry that to create legislation to push forward to legislators. And the law that they came up with, the template law that they came up with, was called the Common Sense Consumption Act, which just by its very nature, they're admitting our products are really bad, and you should have the common sense to know they're bad for you, and therefore it's not our fault when you die from eating them. I mean, that's what they came up with as the name. I mean, it's like you could have come up with anything like eat healthy legislation, or it's not our fault that you like cheeseburgers. I mean, anything, but except for they came up with, common sense. You should know better. You should know better that our products are going to kill you, therefore it's not our fault. this law exists in I think about 15 states where you can't hold a food manufacturer liable for the food they sell you, even if it ends up killing you. I don't know if Hawaii is one of those states. Probably a pretty quick Google search. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Hawaii is one of those states, to be honest. Virginia, where I'm from, it is. But so it's not just meat manufacturers. It's also, there's a huge financial stake from the pharmaceutical world. Stints generate about $5 billion in revenue for surgeries and hospitals that put in stents to try and prevent people from having heart attacks. Stents, by the way, have never been proven to prevent heart disease or stop heart disease. You can get a stent put in it because you have a clogged artery in your heart, but it's actually not going to stop you from having a heart attack. Another artery is just going to clog instead. And then statin drugs, which, how many people here are familiar with statin drugs? Right? A lot of people, because so many people take statin drugs or cholesterol-lowering drugs. That's a $35 billion industry. Statin drugs do not prevent you from having a heart attack. They don't prevent cardiovascular disease. And they actually don't extend life. Yet they make $35 billion a year off of that. Chronic disease is responsible, so cancer, diabetes, heart disease, is a $1.5 trillion industry. That's the GDP equivalent of the 10th richest country in the world. That is a massive moneymaker. Do you think any of these people want that to go away? Nope. So what do? They fund the American Cancer Society. They fund the American Diabetes Association. I mean, these are corporations that are they're giving millions of dollars to these organizations, and yet they're making billions of dollars off the diseases these organizations are supposed to be fighting against. Why would you give money to somebody who is trying to stop the thing you're making money off of? Maybe so they don't bring up any sort of solutions. None of their drugs actually solve the problem that these organizations are fighting against. That's a major conflict of interest, in my opinion. Pharmaceutical industry also pushes really hard on the government. They're the largest lobbying. They spend more on lobbying than any other industry, which again was really shocking to me, the thought that pharmaceutical companies spend more money on lobbying than even defense or banks. I mean, people talk about like big Wall Street lobbying government, controlling our government. That's pharmaceutical industry greatly tops that. Consumers eat meat, dairy, and eggs, then they need the pharmaceutical products. Pharmaceutical companies and meat, dairy products support the health organizations and government, and therefore we're not going to hear that solution. Plant-based diet, again, ability to reverse, prevent, and potentially cure all the diseases we just covered. But it's not just these organizations or the government or these companies. There's also this real misconception that we have to eat meat. We have to eat animal products to survive because we need protein. And so that's a big thing too. It's all of us. It's taking responsibility for ourselves. But plants are the only thing on this planet that has the ability to make protein. Animals do not make protein. They simply take protein from plants and they reformulate it and put it into their cells. The only source of protein on this planet is from plants. So why not get it from plants directly instead of mashing it up together with saturated fat, cholesterol, dioxins, all the other nasty things that come with animal products? Protein recommendation is about 50 grams a day on average, yet most Americans eat about twice that. And yet we don't even eat half as much of the minimum requirement for fiber. Fiber is so important for our health. I mean, it is one of the best things for blood cleansing, for blood pressure control, for digestion, for prevention of cancer. I mean, fiber is so important, yet we don't ever hear about fiber. We only hear about protein. Eat all the fiber you can fit in your mouth on as much as possible. Fiber has been shown as one of the best things you can do to encourage weight loss. It's like, eat more fiber and you will lose weight. I mean, it's this incredible thing that doesn't get any attention because there's not a whole lot of marketing dollars behind it. You could eat nothing but rice, brown rice, and broccoli, and that's 2,000 calories of brown rice and broccoli. That's how much food it actually comes out to. You get more than enough protein. That's 80 grams of protein just on 2,000 calories of brown rice and broccoli. And I actually had a physician come up to me after watching the film, and they said, actually, that's closer to 200 grams of protein coming out of brown rice and broccoli, 2,000 calories. From the research we saw, it was about 80 grams. So Nobody would think those are high protein foods, and yet they're going to be more than sufficient to cover your protein needs. So I'm just going to kind of go through this really quick. We are actually not omnivores. We are frugivores. We're not even herbivores. Our jaws move side to side, forward and back. No omnivore on the planet can do that. They all move top to bottom. They can maybe go forward and back a little bit. Our stomach acid is vastly less because we're digesting plants instead of meat. Our intestines are 9 times our body length versus 3 times our body length. Their body length for omnivores. If we were really omnivores, we'd have to change a lot about our bodies. We'd have to get rid of our cheeks. Only herbivores have these things because we got to put food in our mouth and chew it up a bunch. Most omnivores and carnivores bite and just swallow whole. We are frugivores. I mean, we're so far from being omnivores. We are behavioral omnivores. Yes, we eat basically anything that we see in front of us, but that does not make us omnivores. It means that we just put whatever we see in front of us in our mouths. I mean, for example, we have an innate drive for salt. We seek out sodium. Only herbivorous animals seek out salt because sodium is really low in the plant kingdom. But if you're an omnivore or carnivore, you have no desire for salt because you're going to get more than enough salt by eating the flesh and blood of other creatures. So, I mean, for example, dogs, they did a really horrific study. They took dogs in a lab, removed all the sodium from their food, and put a bowl of salt right next to it, and they let the dogs eat. And the dogs all died from sodium deficiency because they would not eat salt because they have no desire for it. They can't smell it. We can smell salt. I mean, anybody who's ever seen cows or horses know that they go to a salt lick because they desire that. That's something only herbivore animals have, and that's something that we have. I mean, our saliva produces amylase, which is designed just to break down starch. Only herbivore animals have that. We are 100% herbivores. Yes, we can survive eating more than just plants, but once our consumption of animal products goes over 10% of our total calories, this is when you start seeing all the negative side effects. We are plant eaters. Anyone who says, oh, I got canine teeth, ask them to go kill an animal with their bare hands and eat it raw. They're going to have a really tough time. Ask them to go pull up a carrot and eat that raw. They're going to say, oh, sweet. Just to kind of wrap it up really quick, just getting rid of heart disease, a completely preventable, completely treatable disease, a leading cause of death. If we just got rid of that in the United States, it would be ability to generate $48 trillion. That's 3 times US GDP. We like to believe that we're the richest country in the world, but we literally would be the richest country in the world. When you think of all the dollars that are lost due to healthcare, all of the dollars that are lost due to sick days, to people having to take out second jobs, having to work or take off from work to be able to take care of loved ones who are suffering from heart disease, and you just remove that, that's $48 trillion. That's something we all can do. If you or a loved one has heart disease, do some more searching, look into the benefits of a plant-based diet. If you can, find a physician who encourages a plant-based diet and has a track record of treating heart disease with a plant-based diet. If you have type 2 diabetes, do the same. If you're suffering from a type of cancer or a loved one suffering from a type of cancer, do the same. Dig a little bit deeper. And when a doctor or a physician or an expert says that it's not healthy, ask them just a simple question. What is in meat, dairy, and eggs that you can't get from plants? And there will be crickets, because everything you need you can get from plants. And people say, oh, but B12. Well, hey, guess what? Animals don't make B12 either. Bacteria make B12, so get it from plants.